through their lack of engagement with the real world, or even seemingly living in it, actively despise the capitalist activity that to many millions of us is human, moral, creative, and dynamic. We have an energy secretary who couldn't be doing more damage to our living standards and our economy if he was actively trying to hurt us. We have an education secretary who has thrown out 20 years of political consensus on education policy, one that has made English schools the best in the whole Western world, sacrificing your child's future on the altar of her slavish devotion to the trade unions and her ambition to winning their support, of course, at the upcoming Labour leadership election. We have a Justice Secretary who once said that Brexiteers like me were worse than Nazis, and who's throwing out an ancient liberty of this land in the form of jury trials, all whilst locking up people on Twitter. We have a Foreign Secretary giving away sovereign British territory, just as the world gets more dangerous and we are menaced by, first amongst others, a Russia that cares not a jot for words, it only respects strength. We have a Health Secretary who's ploughing ahead with giving children life-destroying hormone blockers, even though we know conclusively now know the damage that they do. And of course, worse, as calamitous as this shower of a government is, there are radical Islamists waiting in the wings to supplant half the cabinet at the next general election and enter parliament. Is there not still a teacher in hiding in Batley? Is there not an attempt by the CPS to introduce blasphemy laws via the back door? Just last week, did we not learn that a police force whose response to uncovering a plot by a group of Muslims in the West Midlands to organise into an armed militia and commit pogrom against Jewish football fans was to lie to the public and to blame the Jews? This is a sickness deep in the heart of our country that for 40 years we have let fester. We should have nipped political Islam in Britain in the bud the moment there were protests against an author for the crime of writing a book. Some of the biggest victims of these Muslim Brotherhood fanatics may be the millions of moderate, decent, patriotic British Muslims. And they may be, as we have seen, Britain's Jewish community too. But my friends, make no mistake, the rest of the country are every bit as much in their sights too. And the only political leader who has spoken up about this at great personal threat, who has pledged to ban the Muslim Brotherhood and the whole sinister fifth column in Britain, Nigel Farage, the man sitting by me now. I'm inspired by his willingness to say difficult truths rather than hide behind a comfortable lie. I'm inspired by the fact that he and his team understand the radical changes required on our economy to save us from the impending debt trap. I'm inspired by their understanding that we need a foreign policy, one that ruthlessly seeks the British national interest. I'm inspired by their concern over the broiling social tensions out there in the country, and in my view, the undervalued risk of sustained civil unrest if we don't get back on track. In short, ladies and gentlemen, I'm inspired by reform. Our best days can lie ahead, they really can, and we can move into a glorious future. But at the moment, Britain is broken. Britain needs reform. I have joined this movement to put my shoulder to the wheel to help it. I encourage others to join us too. Thank you very much indeed.
Nadhim, thank you and welcome on board. Right, we have the usual list of questions, beginning with Ian Watson from the BBC.
first question to Nadhim Zahawi. Obviously, nobody doubts your acumen as a businessman, but you were sacked as Conservative Party chair for your tax affairs and what you said about your tax affairs. Do you really provide the right image for a party that's meant to be anti-establishment? And to Nigel, I can ask you as well. Today, on substance, today the Labour Party is introducing necessary legislation to give people parental rights from day one in the job. Is that something you would reverse if you came to power? And on another topic today, Ofcom in the past 20 minutes has announced that it is investigating Grok X. Do you welcome that investigation?
Thank you, Ian. I wrote a book about my time in government and about my final chapter, my departing government as chairman of the party. I built a great business in YouGov, and at some stage, HMRC decided that I needed to pay more tax on that business, which I did. I had a choice, of course, by the way, which is to instruct my accountants to challenge HMRC, but of course, they were reporting into me as Chancellor, and that's why I decided actually the appropriate thing to do was to settle. The mistake I made is not to be specific about the settlement in my declarations to the Cabinet Office, and I deal with that in detail in my book. And I absolutely think that politicians should be held to a higher level of accountability, but I shouldn't be precluded from doing the right thing via my country, and I think I've got a set of talents and experiences that I can lend the team that Nigel's building to be able to get this country back on track.
Yeah, it's the big difference really between here and America. And by the way, America's growing at 4.3%. That was the last figure we saw, and we're not growing at all. And in America, we accept that people have companies that fail. In fact, most successful Americans boast about how many failures they've had. And I saw Leila Cunningham being attacked by the media because a couple of her investments in firms haven't worked. So what? You know, that's what it's all about. She risked her money. Some you win, some you lose. And there's nobody with a complex business empire that does not have to have negotiations at some point with HMRC. That is how the world works. And I'd much rather have Nadhim, who's been through that experience and come out the other end. And he could have just gone abroad. He could have just disappeared for a few years and not paid any tax, which, by the way, increasingly is what people are doing. So, yeah, you know, we've got a very, very broad range of people in this party, but I'm pleased to say we've got several people in the upper echelons of reform who've been successful in business, unlike the government, where not one of them has. I'm all for parental rights. It's just all about what that balance and relationship is with employers. And I think, you know, what we've seen with the employment rights legislation thus far in this government is employer after employer saying, we will take on fewer people. And the rapid rise of youth unemployment, I think, bears testament to that already. On Grok, I mean, nothing from the current set of regulators and government would surprise me when it comes to the suppression of free speech. Do we like and welcome the particular feature on Grok that's made the news over the weekend? No, but let's talk to Grok. They've already made one or two steps in our direction. My fear is we'll end up suppressing Grok and further suppressing free speech, and we do not want to do that. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Thank you, Catherine Forster, GB News. Nadhim Zahawi, a few years ago, you tweeted, "I'm not British-born, Mr. Nigel Farage. I am as British as you are. Your comments are offensive and racist. I would be frightened to live in a country run by you." Why the change of heart? And this was 2015.
Oh, quite recent then, thank you. Yeah.
Well, just asking about the change of heart. And also on Iran, Mr. Farage, would you support Britain potentially supporting US military involvement in Iran, and also us possibly prescribing the IRGC? Thank you.
We should have prescribed the IRGC years ago, just as we should have prescribed the Muslim Brotherhood years ago, and I've been saying those things clearly and consistently for many, many years, and I've reiterated them in recent times. I cannot believe the stupidity of Obama, the European Union, the British Foreign Office, and some of your former colleagues who went along in 2015 with this JCPOA deal. It's been a disaster. It's freed up tens of billions of dollars for the Iranians. What have they used it for? They've used it to fund the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas. These are massive self-inflicted wounds, and so I've always felt vehemently opposed to this. We went for regime change against Saddam. We went for regime change against Gaddafi. The regime change we've always needed is in Iran, where the wonderful Persian people, with all their amazing talents, have been kept in this theocratic, brutal regime. I very much hope President Trump acts in the next few days. We don't know how many have been killed. It could be perhaps as many as 2,000, I'm told, before coming to this press conference. So would I support military action against the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, on the ground in Iran, so that the good guys can win this revolution? Absolutely, 100%.
Catherine, good on you for digging out a tweet from 11 years ago. But all I would say to you is, if I thought this man sitting next to me was in any way had an issue with people of my color or my background who have come to this country, who have integrated, assimilated, proud of this country, worked hard for this country, paid millions of pounds in taxes in this country, invested in the country, I wouldn't be sitting next to him. And I think he wouldn't be sitting next to me either.
Quite. Rob Powell from Sky News.
Thank you, Rob Powell, Sky News. Mr. Zahawi, as a former vaccines minister, how do you feel about reform giving a platform to a vaccine conspiracy theorist at their conference this year?
We believe in free speech. We gave a platform to
I thought I was asking Mr. Zahawi.
who has nothing to do with that. Well, he wouldn't know the answer to this, would he?
Like, he can
He
give
wouldn't
me
know
his
the
feelings
answer.
on it.
There's
Though,
no
can't
reason why he should. The
And what do you
gentleman that spoke is part indirectly of the American administration and gave an opinion.
Okay. Well, if Mr. Zahawi wanted to answer that, and also tell me, what would you say to colleagues that you worked with in the Conservative government during the pandemic who might feel a little betrayed today? And Mr. Farage, if I may as well, in 2022, when Nadhim Zahawi was appointed Chancellor, you said, I thought Zahawi had principles, but tonight we learned all he's interested in is climbing that greasy pole. Are you now greasing that pole for your new colleague?
If you look at the clip, you will see that I profess to be a fan.
You did.
Of the deal. I very publicly said I'm a big supporter of this guy. And actually, there was a period of time when I thought, perhaps, if he became the leader of the Conservative Party, things might start to look a little different. So I was a fan, openly, publicly professed fan. I was disappointed that he decided to join what I saw as a failing government at that moment in time. But I've always been a fan of his.
Rob, I think you walked into that one. But thank you, Nigel, and thank you for the compliment. Look, ultimately, I reiterate again, I wouldn't be sitting next to Nigel if he thought that what we did on vaccine was in some way a failure. Quite the opposite. He's always said to me that what we were able to do was to harness the best of Britain, both from outside the civil service and from the civil service. We had Brigadier Phil Prosser, the great of our military, the great Emily Lawson, who came out from outside government to come and help into government, was something that he admired. But I have to say to you, and Nigel just gave the details, rightly so, because I wouldn't have known the details about their party conference. I have to say to you, I prefer a party conference and a party that is open and believes in free speech and allows their members, their candidates, to debate openly and to actually have substantive disagreement but come together and then move forward with a strategy, real clear strategy, than parties that don't allow that in the way the Labour Party is behaving and they behave at their party conferences.
Maybe worth talking of vaccine rollout, remembering, maybe the Prime Minister's watching, we were only able to do what we did in the speed that we did it because we were not members of the European Union and all the associated medical bodies. All right? And that all seems to have been forgotten. We had the freedom to move and to act. And what Nadhim proved during that is this bloke gets stuff done. And if we head on and win the next general election, we're going to have a lot of stuff to do, including him. Thank you. Shihab Khan, ITV.
Shihab Khan, ITV News. Nadhim Zahawi, you were a Conservative councillor, you became Chancellor, and you've now defected to Reform UK. You had previously said that you would be uncomfortable living in a country that was led by Nigel Farage. Given your dynamic, moving opinions, how can we trust a word that you say now? And Nigel Farage, a question for you. There's been a lot of talk about social media being banned for those under the age of 16. Is that something that you would be supportive of?
Good question. Go on.
Shahab, look, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I wouldn't be sitting here if I thought that Nigel Farage wasn't someone capable of leading the country, of becoming Prime Minister. And I'm sitting here because I have observed Nigel Farage in work, in operation, with world leaders, where not only was I impressed, but also watched him push back when he needed to. None of the sycophancy that you see from the current Prime Minister with the way he's behaving internationally. Chagos Islands comes to mind on that one. And that's why I'm sitting here. The nation will make up its own mind. I could easily, as you heard me say in my speech and Nigel repeated, just sit at home and do nothing. I think the country is facing a national emergency on the economy, on our open borders, on what is happening in parts of the country, which I genuinely worry about, that could actually tip over into civil unrest. And I could just walk away, but I chose not to, and that's why I'm here.
I 100% support the ban on smartphones in school. 100% support it. Yeah, leave them in a locker as you go into the school, maybe take them out lunchtime break, I don't know, but I 100% support that. When it comes to banning things, I'm not very keen generally on banning things. My answer would be, let's see where Australia is in 6 months' time. Let's see whether this actually works. Now look, we have laws, of course, about what age you can start drinking. I mean, do those laws actually stop people drinking under 18? I'm not sure they do. I would say, let's see the Australian experiment, let's see how it works, and then make our minds up. Thank you very much. Martina Bett from The Sun.
Thank you very much. Martina Bett from The Sun. Given a lot of attention has been paid to social media and youngsters, I would like to know if you thought that worklessness among young people, mental health crisis, and social media are linked. And if so, given you're against a social media ban for under 16s, what would you propose to do to tackle it?
I didn't say I was against it. I said there's an experiment that's been started by the Australians, and let's see whether it works or not. I mean, I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to come in. Look, worklessness amongst young people is terrible. It's awful. Too many of them are being told they're victims. We have ADHD diagnoses that are, frankly, multiple times what they ought to be. And I do genuinely think if you tell a kid at 16, 17 they're a victim, they may well stay with that mentality through the rest of their lives. And my colleague Richard Tice has done some terrific work on Send, where he says the odd thing is huge numbers of people are getting put on these programs that shouldn't, and those that really need the help aren't frankly getting what they need. So there's a lot of thinking to do. Frankly, this government, everything this government has done has added to worklessness for youth. Particularly cruel was dropping to £5,000 the level at which employers have to start paying national insurance. And yeah, great, to put up minimum wage for youngsters by 20% sounds wonderful, but you add the cost of that, you add the cost of NI, you add the cost of everything else in a business, and there are many tens of thousands fewer people out of work, young people out of work now than there were this time last year. And my feeling, and I could be wrong, this is purely a guess from going around the country, but I don't think I can ever recall out in the provinces such a mood of negativity amongst Britain's small and medium-sized businesses. And I suspect you're going to see some shocking results from the British economy over the course of 2026, all of, part of which why I think the general election will come much earlier than 2029. Martin Beckford from the Mail.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Zahawi, have you been promised any specific role with reform, either in opposition or in government, and will you stand as an MP again? And to Mr. Farage, are you still not worried that voters will see these increasing numbers of former Tory ministers and say there's no difference between you and them? Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. No promises at all. I was a foot soldier in the Conservative Party. I am now a foot soldier in Reform UK because I genuinely believe the country cannot afford a decade of Labour government. And the only real hope for us of removing this government is to get behind Nigel Farage and his team.
What's the difference between us? I spent a quarter of a century campaigning for us to leave the European Union. I had to fight the Conservative Party tooth and nail all the way through, apart from a few individuals who were able to break cover once the referendum hove into view. I have, since 2004, been against the mass expansion of the European Union to 8, then 10 former communist countries, because I realised, whilst we get some great people, frankly, the population surge would put pressure on housing, pressure on public services. You know, I advocated leaving the ECHR in 2020 from the middle of the Channel in Dover, saying unless we do, this trickle will become, well, I used the word invasion, which I got in terrible trouble for, but 190,000 people later, it's tough to think that I wasn't actually right. Net zero. Richard and I have campaigned against net zero for goodness knows how long. They put it into law. So the differences are enormous. And when people like Nadhim come to us and say, look, you know, we did 1 or 2 good things, but hands up, we got a lot wrong. And frankly, for the Boris wave and for that breach of trust with those that voted Brexit and then lent their votes to the Conservative Party in 2019, that is a betrayal of trust that should never, ever be forgiven. So no, we are not going to become the Conservative Party 2.0, but our weakness is we lack front-line experience. I've always been very candid about that. And with people like Nadhim, they've been on the inside, you know, they know how government works, or perhaps more accurately, how government doesn't work. So we welcome his experience very much indeed. Thank you. Christian Cowgie, Express.
It's a nice surprise. Nadhim, one of your other jobs, of course, was in the Cabinet Office. So I wonder if you're going to be helping specifically your other former defector, Mr. Kruger, with the preparations for that, and whether you have any thoughts on some of the more minutiae elements of how to dismantle the disruptive and overbearing civil service.
Thank you, Christian. And I hope some of my experience and my input is to really work with Danny and his team on this. Why do I say that? Because I saw the best and the worst during the pandemic. So when I was appointed as the Vaccine Deployment Minister, I said to the then Prime Minister that I will only take the job on if I could speak with his authority. His response was to ask, what does that mean? I said that what it means, I've got to be able to access you in minutes and seconds and minutes rather than in hours and days. And we had to do that because if I didn't have that capability, I would have never been able to deliver just shy of 1 million doses a day from a standing start, no infrastructure whatsoever. The best was having people like Brigadier Phil Prosser, embedded into the NHS and his team, because he was in charge of supplying our brave men and women on the front line. And there is no excuse. You can't be, half an hour late when you have to deliver bullets and life-saving equipment to the front line of our military. Emily Lawson, who came from outside of government to actually fix things inside the NHS and then take on this role. Ruth Todd, who we pulled out of the Ministry of Defence. She was in charge of the supply chain for our nuclear submarine. I can tell you, all the manufacturers were frightened of Ruth more than anybody else, any minister or anyone else. It's putting that sort of team together. The difficulty is, what I said in my speech, is you get the shrug of the shoulders and saying, it's too complicated, too complex, and we can't really do much about it. And ministers don't have the experience and the confidence to be able to say, no, let's sit down, I want to see the evidence. You know what I just heard from Nigel fills me with even more confidence when he answered the question about the 16-year-old and ban on social media. Let's see the evidence from Australia. Evidence-based strategy in business or in politics tends to deliver better outcomes, success, right? When we move away from that and start playing politics and start playing, oh, well, Minister, you can make an announcement tomorrow, but it's just an announcement to sort of get you out of the way, then things go wrong.
One of the other jobs, of course, that Nadhim did for the Conservative Party was to be the chairman of it and to raise a huge amount of money. And we're hoping he'll do much the same for us, amongst other things. Sorry about the pressure, but there we are. Tony Diver from The Telegraph.
Hello, Tony Diver from The Telegraph. Mrs. Zahawi, on this point about COVID vaccines, I hear the point about free speech, but the doctor previously mentioned told Reform's conference that the vaccines that you rolled out may have caused the King's cancer. And he was described by David Bull as someone who worked with him to write Reform's health policy. So do you reject those views? And if they have shaped Reform's health policy, will you try to change it?
I think you'll find David Bull actually spoke about vaccines on Friday night at our event that we held down at the Excel Centre with just shy of 3,000 people launching our London campaign. And I think you'll find, if you look at what Dr. David Bull, our chairman, said, how proud he was of the work actually for centuries that London had done and led the way in with vaccines. And as Nadhim said previously, you know, we get all sorts of speakers from all over the world, some of whom have different opinions.
Can I just come in, Tony?
Please.
I expected more from you, right? That was a really stupid question, right? And it doesn't even deserve an answer. So try again next time.
Right, Dan Bloom, Politico. I'm the nice guy here, you know, I mean...
Thank you, Dan Bloom from Politico. Mr. Farage, I heard what you said there on Iran. More generally, when it comes to sort of Donald Trump's worldview, he's obviously, you know, in some ways becoming the sort of interventionist president overseas. Do you feel that him being the sort of the world's commander-in-chief more generally is not a thing that you would agree with? And Mr. Zahawi, I will try one more time with a stupid question. Did you seek any assurances from Mr. Farage or anyone else about Reform's policy on vaccines before you joined?
Right, let me take that again. I still think it's a stupid question, and I'll tell you for why. I know you want to persist on this because you just heard from the leader of the Reform Party that David Bull spoke about this and was very clear on this, and you're still going on about, you know, were vaccines efficacious or not. I would not be sitting here, nor would Nigel be sitting next to me, if we didn't agree that we did the right thing for the nation to get the vaccine program to the success that it achieved, the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, if not in the world. And so that is why I think it's a stupid question.
Okay. If Donald Trump is knocking out the brutal leaders of Venezuela, and let's hope Iran, and thereby taking away the greatest allies that the Chinese Communist Party and an increasingly dangerous-looking Vladimir Putin, if that's what Trump is doing, I would argue very strongly he's doing the world a favour. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Tim Stanley, Daily T.
Tim Stanley, Daily T. Are you a one-man band? Joke!
Clearly,
joke!
Clearly.
Right. You're clearly not. There's a lot of people in this band, I can see that. A Conservative spokesman has just said, Reform is fast becoming the party of has-been politicians looking for their next gravy train. So my first question, Nadhim, are you a has-been politician? And Nigel, is there any Tory politician you won't take? What is your bar? How do you decide who to say yes to and who to say no to? And have you ever said no?
No, that is a very good question. Have we said no to people? Yes, we have. Yes, we. Well, no, I'm not going to tell you that, am I? For goodness' sake. I mean, that's an even more stupid question. Look, we want people who believe in what we're doing, and the reason I was a fan of this guy, and rather hoped he would become the leader of the Conservative Party, is I could see, you know, on some of the really tough issues facing this country that others would rather simply brush under the carpet, like extremism, as you mentioned in your speech earlier, that this was a guy that had the conviction and that actually wanted to do it. So, you know, before the next question comes, yes, there are plenty of people in the Conservative Party currently talking to me, and some might fit and some really might not fit. But they all can see that May the 7th is an absolutely pivotal moment after which there is a strong chance that the Conservative Party, after its couple of hundred years, will cease to be a national political party, hence all the conversations that are going on.
Tim, whoever the spokesman for my old party, I hope they'll ask the leader if I'm a has-been politician when she and her team came to me not too long ago without betraying confidences for my advice on how the party should move forward. So I think that speaks volumes for my ability. As I said earlier in my speech, I could just sit at home and enjoy my life, but I've decided to come forward and be a foot soldier for Reform UK, because I think it's our last chance to really get this country back on its feet.
Maybe we should return the compliment to whoever gave you that statement and say you're and never will be, which strikes me as being perhaps the right way of looking at it. I'm starting to enjoy this now. Right, David Lynch from PA.
Hello. Hi, Mr. Farage, David Lynch from PA. Yeah, just wanted to ask you about something that appeared in the Sunday Times over the weekend. There was reporting in that newspaper citing a source close to the Trump administration saying that Trump has totally lost faith with Farage and doesn't believe he is for real. Are you for real?
I thought, I'm for real, don't worry about that. As far as Trump losing faith in me, I don't know. I mean, I saw him in October, I sat with him in November at Mar-a-Lago and chatted about a few things. He's always been enormously supportive of me. I'm supportive of him. We don't see eye to eye on every issue. And as Nadhim says, if I don't see eye to eye, I tell him I don't see eye to eye. I'm not frightened of saying to people what I think. Do you know what? Sometimes journalists write things that may not necessarily be wholly true. Natasha Clark, LBC. It's quite fun, isn't it? Here we go.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Mr. Zahawi. Mr. Zahawi, you are someone that supported Boris Johnson famously and 36 hours later called for him to go. Mr. Farage, are you sure that you can trust this man? If you can, are you prepared to give him a job in reform, preparing for reform government, fundraising, health policy perhaps? And Nadhim, your former Tory colleagues, of course, will be looking to you today. They have said, just in the last few minutes, you have shown the level of loyalty for sale. Can I just ask you, why do you think that Kemi Badenoch doesn't have what it takes to become Prime Minister and Nigel does? Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Boris Johnson decided to keep me on as Chancellor after his resignation. I think I've seen at close contact some of the pitfalls and the mistakes that Prime Ministers have made. And like Nigel, I'm not frightened of saying to my colleagues that we're making a mistake. And I hope it's something that, a value that Nigel identifies with. What was your second question? Why do you not think that Kemi Badenoch has one? Well, if nothing else, she's got the baggage of what I think is a defunct brand, a brand that the nation has decided they can no longer trust. And of course, I don't think, in my view, she's able to form the next government. And ultimately, if you put country ahead of party, you come to the same conclusion that the only person that you can really get behind and put the work and the energy into is Nigel Farage and his team.
And yes, he will be doing a big job for us, and all of that will be announced in the weeks to come. As for loyalty, well, if he's disloyal, you'll find that we deal with things very much more effectively in Reform UK. Well, I do mean it, actually, but I don't see it being an issue, honestly, I don't. And that's the only thing I ever asked for. The only thing I ever asked for as leader, in all the years I've done politics, the only thing I asked for is loyalty. If you want to disagree with me, you want to shout at me, you want to throw things at me, I really, really, really don't mind. But we do it behind closed doors. And it was so interesting at our conference up in Birmingham that we had the founder of Reform Canada come along, and they went all the way from a tiny fringe party way out west in Canada to being the biggest party in Canadian politics, to Stephen Harper becoming the Prime Minister for 10 years. And that was the one thing that Preston Manning told us, is we had our arguments in private. And that's all I ask of anybody that comes. And we will have our disagreements. We won't see eye to eye on everything. No two human beings can. But they're the rules within this organisation. It's very, very straightforward. Lucy White from Bloomberg.
Hi, Nigel. Can I ask you again on Grok? You mentioned that yourself and President Trump have disagreed on things in the past. Do you think that President Trump is right to consider sanctioning UK officials at Ofcom for taking action against child pornography on Grok? And Nadhim, can I ask you as well, as a former businessman yourself, do you think that Reform's policy, or Reform currently has enough policy on international trade and foreign policy? I've heard from businesses myself that they're not clear on what that Reform policy might be. And in terms of importing and exporting in particular, do you have any ideas that you will be sharing with the party?
Thank you, Lucy. Can I just touch upon, I know Nigel will come back on this, on the whole issue of Grok. What happened with Grok, by the way, you could do on PowerPoint, right? Anyone who chooses to want to create an image, you could have done in the past. So technology is moving fast. What you don't do, in my view, is take a heavy-handed approach and start banning stuff, right? What Nigel said is absolutely spot on. Elon Musk is one of the great businessmen of our generation, and he's rightly come out and said, we will fix this, and the fix is to make sure that people who are registered, who you know who their identity is, can use some of this new technology, not people who hide their identity, and I think that's a good thing. But when you start attacking a business just because you don't agree with the owner's politics or stance, I think it's a dangerous place to be, which is where, if the reports are right, is where Keir Starmer is at on this. So I just want to remind everyone here that all this stuff, technology moves all the time, right? We have to be the place that is open, and especially my new party and their absolute belief in free speech, be the place that cherishes that. On business and trade, I'm going to compliment someone else who is in the room here, is Richard Tice, because I've seen Richard operate internationally as well. He walks in a room and people listen. And that's, by the way, half the battle. More important than all the other headlines that you make is when they're listening, they know that you're true and you'll deliver. And that, if you ask any business, any other country that engages in negotiations on free trade with the UK, they think that actually up until now we've been totally slow and flat-footed in our negotiations. Why haven't we got a CETA deal with countries like the UAE? Because we've been slow. Because all we're saying is, well, we'll wait until we get the whole GCC. If that doesn't happen, we won't do this. Too flat-footed, too slow. We need to pump growth back in the economy, and I think what Richard will do will absolutely deliver on that.
You may well worry and ask, why are the Americans so concerned about what's happening on platforms here? The answer is very simple. Graham Linehan, a foreign national, who, for what he said when he was in Arizona, was arrested by 5 armed police at Heathrow Airport. And the fear of the Trump administration, this could happen to any of their top businessmen. I can't think of a more negative thing for the British economy or the reputation of our country than that. Matthew Holhouse, The Economist.
Thank you. I want to ask about defence policy, if I may. Mr. Farage, you've been very clear that you wouldn't support the prospect of UK troop deployments to Ukraine. You've also been very consistent for years in arguing that NATO's enlargement to Eastern Europe has been provocative to Russia. I just wondered if you could take the opportunity really to clarify. Would a reform government maintain and uphold the UK's commitments to troops and aircraft on NATO's eastern flank, particularly Estonia and Poland, where there are big UK deployments under enhanced forward presence and air policing? Or, in your view, have these deployments constituted a provocation of Russia?
Listen, you're talking about an historical argument. Remember, I'm the one person that stood up in 2014 in the European Parliament and said there will be a war in Ukraine. All right? I got it right. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else saw it. I think the European Union's eastward expansion, NATO's eastward expansion, gave Putin a casus belli. he could say to the Russian people, look, this is what they're doing. So I think tactically we've got that wrong. Am I committed to NATO? Yes. Do I think Donald Trump's been a good thing for NATO? Yes, I do. He's massively increased spending of NATO countries, having made the same pledges as every American president since Kennedy. The difference with Trump is when he says stuff, he actually means it. But overall, you know, I don't think anybody would deny that under 14 years of Conservative government, our services were hollowed out. At the end of the 14 years, we were spending less on defence than we had been under Gordon Brown, and probably not having gripped some of the procurement difficulties in that area as well. So we are very strongly committed to defence as a party. I suspect, you know, part of the benefit cuts in spending that we're going to have to make will be because we do need to spend more on the defence budget.
Sorry, no, on Estonia and Poland, there's specific NATO deployments that are in.
Well, they are NATO members now. It's done. So once you're a NATO member, you must be defended. All right? I mean, as I say, you know, Henry Kissinger spoke about this. You know, Kissinger was talking about NATO expansion after the fall of the Berlin Wall. These debates have been going on right back to sort of 1991, 1992. They're not, but frankly, whatever my historical position on this, it's not particularly relevant for where we are right now, and Putin does appear to be increasingly dangerous, is my take. Anna Gross, Financial Times.
Thank you. This is a question for Nigel. You say you would simply refuse to pay if an exit clause was added to the EU SPS deal, but that would inevitably collapse the entire trade and cooperation agreement. Are you happy to do that? And would a Farage government then mean dragging the British public through years of a damaging Brexit 2.0?
No, I mean, look, the tragedy of Brexit is we didn't do it. Didn't do it. And all right, we had the pandemic, and that's the argument that always gets made. We had the pandemic, therefore we didn't get time. For Keir Starmer to realign with single market rules is easy because we never ever took the opportunity or the potential advantage of moving away from it. So I'm absolutely furious at both of them. But look, you're presupposing that Starmer would sign up to something as treacherous as this. I'm sure he won't do it. Thank you. Let's go on to Jay Merrick at the iPaper.
Can I ask who approached whom in this conversation? Did Nadhim ask you? And are you having more conversations with former members of Boris's cabinet to defect? And then secondly, on Iran, what do you think Keir Starmer should actually do? Would you like to see the RAF involved in any military action there? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I suspect Keir Starmer will do absolutely nothing. Nothing. I don't know what his view on the JCPOA deal was at the time, but given that it was favoured by the international community, he would have been in favour of it. So he probably wants to keep the mullahs running Tehran. I just don't know. Having conversations with all sorts of people, Jen, as I said earlier, there is a growing realisation that May the 7th is it is not only the most significant electoral date between now and the next general election, but it could well be a day that reshapes politics in a way that, frankly, on the centre-right has not been seen ever, frankly.
Nigel and I have known each other for a very long time, and I think it's when our very good mutual friend, Nick Candy, decided to support Nigel was the beginning of our conversations together. Nick has done a phenomenal job, by the way, in raising some of those millions for you, and I will see where I can help as well. But in December, I allowed my membership of the Conservative Party to lapse because I wanted to reflect. And over the Christmas period, I came to the conclusion that genuinely the country faces a national emergency. And if, as I've always done through my life, because what this country's given me, I wake up every morning, I have to pinch myself to think how lucky I've been. And you need luck, by the way. Any businessman who tells you otherwise is either lying to you or naive. How lucky I've been to have been allowed to be in this country and to become British. Then you'll come to the same conclusion that we need this government out. If you want this government out, there's only one choice. and my colleagues will have to reflect in my old party. And I think, as Nigel just said, the local elections are going to be a very big moment for reform and for the future of this country.
Yeah, we're getting there. Robert Hutton, the critic.
Hi there. Question, first of all, for Mr. Farage. Last week, you said you were very troubled by what was going on X. You seem to be moving to a position that child porn on demand is just something we're going to have to live with. Don't you think that your position on this would carry more weight if you and your MPs weren't taking money from the app that's offering the child porn on demand?
Nice try.
And a question for Mr. Zahawi. Do you see yourself going back into the House of Commons, or has reform offered you the peerage that the Conservative Party didn't give you?
Because one is troubled by some of the things that happen in the online world, does not equate to thinking that the organisations themselves should be banned. There is a really quite big fundamental difference between those two positions. As for money, well, you know, as you may well know, we probably don't know, you wouldn't because of the way the declarations work, I employ people privately to help me with my social media accounts. Let me assure you, I don't make money on X. It costs me several £1,000s every month.
I will, I hope, be deployed whichever way the leader and the future Prime Minister of this country feels fit to deploy. And no promises have been made, no promises have been sought. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, you're pushing his case hard. David Burke from The Mirror.
Hi, thank you very much. There's quite a long history of you two having pops at each other, which has given us some few bits to get our teeth into. On another occasion in 2015, Mr. Zahawi, you likened Mr. Farage to Goebbels. The context of that was that...
Could have been worse then, couldn't it?
was that at the time, Mr. Farage, you were proposing ripping up legislation to prevent discrimination on the grounds of ethnicity and nationality in the workplace. You said that it was ludicrous that employers can't differentiate between British and Polish workers at the time. Mr. Zahawi, you responded to that by saying it was a remark Goebbels would be proud of. You also described it as deeply racist. My question to you is, Reform now is proposing to do something similar in relation to welfare, in that qualification would be on the basis of nationality. Are you now, based on your previous position, comfortable with that? And how do you square that circle?
2015 was a general election campaign. All sorts of things get said and done in the heat of battle in general election campaigns, but I don't in any way row back from the comments I made then. I do think we should actually put British workers first. I genuinely do, and I think, you know, you're right. Good question in one sense, because you're right. That logic now applies to benefits. We should not be paying out wholesale benefits to vast numbers of people who come from overseas and who, when they get indefinite leave to remain, of course, are allowed to bring their extended families. And I think these are the arguments of common sense.
And I think, look, when my family came to these shores, we came here because we were determined to integrate. My parents were proud monarchists. They wanted their children to grow up with a real passion and commitment to this country. What has happened, in my view, in recent years, with, dare I say, the sort of the Treasury orthodoxy that all immigration is good for the economy, has completely distorted the cultural life of this country, the fabric of this nation, and the economy. You know, we should be focusing on GDP per capita, on people contributing. And now, when I travel around the world and see countries who do it well, who bring talent, if you're willing to bring your millions of pounds to this country, we're going to welcome you in Reform, right? If you're willing to come here and build an AI business or a manufacturing business, whatever you're going to build, we're going to welcome you. If you're a net contributor, we're going to welcome you. But what has happened is that all was swept aside, and everything was about, let's just open the doors, because the modeling says the bigger the influx, the bigger the GDP. Not true. And that is, for me, is where the evidence has led. And when you see the evidence, you change your mind.
We have seen the evidence. 2 more questions. Ben Quinn from The Guardian.
Thank you. Mr. Zahawi, does this defection come with a personal donation from you to reform? And you mentioned Shamima Begum in your remarks at the beginning. I think Mr. Farage surprised a lot of people last year, suggesting that she could be allowed to come back to the UK. Are you on the same page? And lastly, we're now at 34 people who've levelled accusations of anti-Semitism and racism. Can they all be dismissed as fantasists or political operators? 34 people, and that's to both of you, please. Thank you.
You know, even the quotes that have been read out today of things that Nadhim might have said about me in the 2015 general election campaign just shows you that actually these accusations of racism, isms of all kinds, get thrown around every single day. In fact, they get thrown around so much that, frankly, they almost become meaningless, I'm afraid.
But on Shamima Begum, the moment someone decides that they'll pledge their allegiance and loyalty to a different state, the Islamic State, they forfeit the right, in my view, of being British. And I think I would certainly want to be in a government that will welcome Shamima Begum back, and I'm sure, I hope my then Prime Minister would work very hard to make sure that that never happens. On the racism issue, I dealt with it at the beginning. I don't think I'd be sitting here, or Nigel would be sitting with me, if I thought, or he thought, there was an iota of racism. Although, in preparation for this morning, I thought I'd also look up, Nigel, everything that's been labelled racist in our country. Coffee has been labelled racist. Picnics have been labelled racist.
The Traitors programme, that's racist.
Electricity,
according to The Guardian,
has been labelled racist. And mathematics has been labelled racist.
Yeah.
This is a joke.
Yeah. As for the donation, we haven't got the donation out of him. No donation yet. But he will be locked in a room with Lee Anderson after this press conference, and who knows, we might make some progress. Final question. Daisy Eastlake from The Times.
Thank you. My first question about the defection. You said about how you're in conversation with more Tory MPs and former MPs about defection. Will you put a number on the further number of Tory defections set to come before May? And more generally, The Times reported this morning that the Home Affairs Select Committee is preparing to call for the Home Secretary to sack Craig Guildford, Chief Constable of West Midlands Police Force, over the decision to ban away fans from the Maccabi Tel Aviv match against Aston Villa last year. Farage, you've called for him to go in the past, but how long do you give Shabana Mahmood to sack him?
The answer to your first question is no. And I'm amazed this Guildford bloke's still there. I mean, frankly, what was revealed last week in that abject performance before the committee was something extraordinary, where, I mean, basically, you know, police chief hasn't just lied to everybody, but he's literally kowtowed to the most, I mean, you know, talk about racism, you know, literally kowtowed to just a form of violent extremism. Again, and frankly, you know, it's quite funny, isn't it? I mean, where are all the screaming protests outside the Iranian embassy? Where are all the, you know, the pro-Palestinian lot? It seems they only really turn out when they're having a go at Jews. I'm afraid, I'm sorry to say that. Guildford should have gone already, in my view.
Just on the point on the Maccabi Tel Aviv match, and this is really serious, and I hope Shabana is listening to this today. And I said that on the night, because I was actually doing media on the night. The message this sends is so dangerous and corrosive to our country. Why do I say that? Because the question is, who controls our streets? Right? If the police force in the West Midlands needed additional support, they should have called the Home Secretary and the Defence Secretary and got the army in. Right? No way should we allow Islamists, thugs, and terrorists to feel that they can have control of our streets. And if she doesn't act today, she's going to have a serious problem, in my view. Genuinely, I say this to you.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody.